Hello and welcome to the UNB Law Podcast. My name is Michael Marin and I'm the Dean of Law at UNB. We begin all of our events by recognizing and respectfully acknowledging that the UNB Law community gathers on the unsurrendered and unceded traditional lands of Wolastoqiyik. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Shirley MacLean, QC, a graduate of the UNB Law class of 1990 and the Official Languages Commissioner for New Brunswick. After graduating from UNB Law, Commissioner MacLean practiced law in Fredericton for 4 years and then joined the Law Society of New Brunswick as its Director of Admissions. In 2003, she became the Law Society's Deputy Executive Director and Registrar of Complaints. In this role, she was responsible for investigating, prosecuting, and administering disciplinary matters involving lawyers. Commissioner MacLean has also been the chair of the Mental Health Tribunal in Fredericton since 2017. Fluently bilingual, Commissioner MacLean was appointed Commissioner of Official Languages for New Brunswick in 2019. In this capacity, she is responsible for investigating, reporting on, and making recommendations with respect to compliance with the Official Languages Act. The Commissioner of Official Languages also has a mandate to promote the advancement of both official languages in the province. Commissioner MacLean was appointed Queen's Counsel in 2013 in recognition of her extensive experience and service to the profession. She's also very active in the community, serving on several boards of charitable and not-for-profit organizations. Commissioner MacLean, thank you so much for joining us on the UNB Law Podcast. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Thanks for asking me. It's a pleasure.
So we typically begin these podcasts by asking our guests a little bit about their upbringing, where they're from and how they grew up. So why don't we start there?
Okay. Well, I'm not originally from New Brunswick. I'm from Nova Scotia. I'm from Cape Breton. I was born in Bedak, which is a village of about 800 people in Bedak, and it's pretty well known because it's where the Alexander Graham Bell Museum is located. It's the beginning and the end of the Cabot Trail, which is the famous Cabot Trail in Cape Breton. And very picturesque and very beautiful place to grow up, especially in the summer. Like most places, not as nice in the winter as it is in the summer, but a very small community. Went to a school from grade primary, which is sort of the equivalent of what kindergarten is here. Grade primary to grade 12, the same school. My whole learning years. And came from a family of 4 children. I have one older brother, one older sister, and a younger sister. So, and my dad worked as a carpenter, a house painter. My mom did books at home. My mom had actually gone to St. FX. She went to St. FX when she was 15 years old. Actually, my mother, she was very. She had gone to. There was a school, a Mabu convent school in Cape Breton, as a day student, and then she graduated there very young and then she would say too young to be going to university at that age. But yeah, so education very important to my family. So I lived my whole youth in Bedak. Worked most summers. We lived basically on the water. Bedak is on the Bedore Lake, so beautiful place to live. Again, you knew everyone and you knew everyone where you lived. And like we used to say, what you didn't know about them, you made up. So and well, it's true. And being a tourist town, very, very touristic. So we would have visitors from all over North America. So Americans, Quebecers, and from all over Canada. So and most of us in the summer as students would work in the tourist trade in some way. So a lot of exposure to people from different parts of the world. So it was a really nice place to grow up for sure.
That sounds really interesting, and it reminds me of an earlier guest we had on the podcast, Wade McLaughlin, who told a similar story about growing up in Stanhope in PEI, and you'd have people coming to visit tourists, and how you can make money off of them as a kid.
Definitely, definitely. It was a real, I mean, it's obviously an industry more so even in PEI, but definitely. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And you mentioned St. FX. I think I saw your
Yeah.
X-ring earlier there. So you went
Yeah.
to St. FX as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you studied before going to law school?
So, after high school, it wasn't a choice in our house. You were going to go to university.
Okay.
Um, there was no, even though you were of age to make your own decisions, that was not going to be the case. You could do whatever you wanted after, but you were going to get at least a degree. So I sort of thought about what I would do. Wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. Came from a family that was always, I would say, engaged in public, in news events. My mom was very interested and active in local politics. My dad as well. Um, so always, the first thing, we did every morning before breakfast would listen to The World at 8 on CBC radio. So we always knew what was going on. Current events were very important to us. We're engaged in political discourse in terms of what's going on in Canada, what's going on around the world. So, and my brother had gone to Acadia before I went to school and I went to university. My sister had gone to St. FX as well. My brother had decided to study political science, so I kind of, without really having a clear plan in place as to what I wanted to do, I went to St. FX to study political science
Okay.
and spent 3 years. That was a time when you could do an arts degree in 3 years. So spent 3 great years at St. FX. And certainly was a good degree. Um, Great profs. And following that, in my third year of university at St. FX, my mother passed away. My mother was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was 10 years old. And sort of that was always sort of a theme in our lives as well. She did very well. She lived for much longer than she was supposed to have lived. So um, but she did pass away in my third year at St. FX. So after graduating with my political science degree, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had thought about going to law school, um, but there were a couple of friends of mine from St. FX that were talking about going to Université Laval to learn French. So I sort of hummed and hawed about it, quite frankly, but then I decided as well to go to Quebec City, to Université Laval to learn French. And then sort of everything that's happened in my career sort of has stemmed from that period of time. I studied in Quebec. Um, I studied what was a program at Université Laval called French for Non-Francophones, which was a very, very good program. I did about a year and a half of that. And I also worked in Quebec City in the tourist industry as well. Um, and then following that, I stayed and did a few more university courses myself at Laval in French and that type of thing. So, um, and following that, went to work in Ottawa for a little while. And then again, a number of us sort of, we just really didn't know what we were going to do, worked some jobs and then finally made the decision to do something further in terms of education and applied to UNB Law and there I was.
Can I just follow up on your decision to study French and to go to Quebec City? Because I hear from a lot of our students, Anglophones, who are interested in jobs and careers where they're going to need to be bilingual.
Mhm.
And they say, oh, well, I didn't have a chance to learn French as a kid, and now I can't do it, and it's too late. The other thing that I see is Anglophones who actually have some French, but they're too timid to actually use it and practice it.
Correct.
And I've tried to, and sometimes I'm successful in trying to encourage students to just immerse themselves, just force themselves into that environment.
Yeah.
And you did exactly that. We'll get to
Yeah.
more of this later in the interview. but it does seem to have opened many doors for you. So can you talk a little bit more about that, and maybe, you know, um, what we can do to encourage more Anglophone students to do what you did?
Yeah. I mean, the desire has to be there, and the desire was there in me, not just, it wasn't just a tag along type of thing. When I say I was, engaged in current affairs and that type of thing, during the years that we were growing up, we saw the constitutional talks in Canada in 19, that led to the adoption, the repatriation of the Constitution in 1982, and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that with those constitutional negotiations came the butting of heads with René Lévesque at the time and Pierre Trudeau, um, the push and pull in federal relations between Quebec, Ottawa, what we call Ottawa and Quebec, and I was really brought up with an understanding that of the importance of the province of Quebec to this country, the importance of the fact that we were a bilingual country. So the desire was there on my part, not just as something to do. So I think you have to have the desire to do it, but you also have to have the means. I didn't come from a family that had a lot of money, and I worked every summer because I needed to have the funds to go to university. But there were bursary programs that were very good, that enabled students such as ourselves to go to Laval and be able to study French, and and be able to do so, with this a small part-time job. We're able to do that. So, and in immersing, um, in total immersion is the one way that you're certainly going to learn the language, right? But and I had no French. I didn't speak French when I went to
Wow,
Quebec City at all. Not at
that's
all.
amazing.
Yeah, not at all. So, and then to think that you can, you know, I mean, my French is far from perfect, and every francophone that hears me speak knows I'm an anglophone. But that's all part of that. When you learn learning it as an adult too, as you say, is very difficult and very, um, it's, you feel embarrassed often because you sound like a child when you're learning a language. So when you're, when you're encouraging people to do it, it's like, I'm kind of the example. It does open doors. It does open possibilities to you, definitely. And that's the number one encouragement. And if there's funding, and that's something I, regularly try and, discuss when I have the opportunities to do so, is there has to be funding and programs available for people. And those programs have to exist, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's going to be motivating. Your
Mm.
example motivating to our students. See, it can be done. So,
Yeah, it
Commissioner,
can be
McLean,
done.
you can do it too.
Mm.
So, you mentioned that you finally decided to go to UNB Law. What was behind that decision? Why did you want to go to law school?
Law school again, I just thought, and I thought about it in the past. I felt, you have the idealistic views in your mind of things that you can do as a lawyer. You can help people potentially. It would be of interest to me. I was, always an avid reader. Um, it just seemed to me something I would be interested in. I wasn't frightened of, you often heard about all, the work that was involved with it. My brother had gone to law school at Dal prior to my deciding to go to law school, and he survived it. So I thought, well, I could probably do it too. So, and then I was always attracted to New Brunswick again because knowing it was a bilingual province, we'd sort of lived through the charter negotiations when Richard Hatfield, the premier at the time, who I greatly admired for having done that, the New Brunswick had a bilingual province, and I thought perhaps there'd be more opportunities there for me to be able to use my French. Because I had recently learned it. If I wasn't going to use it, I was going to lose it.
Right.
Yeah.
Very interesting. And then uh, during law school, do you remember your first day there? Do you remember what that was like?
I was thinking about that, and I probably I don't probably remember my first day. I remember the first few days, perhaps. I remember feeling intimidated to a large extent. thinking, am I going to really be up for this? I'd been working in Ottawa, and I sort of, I sort of put off coming to look for an apartment. I remember I was staying with a friend of mine who was in second year, um, Laurie Halfpenny, and who's now a judge in Cape Breton. And I was focused on finding a place to live, but certainly coming to the law school was, very excited to attend, and it was a good experience from beginning to end, really.
Yeah, well, the reason we
Yeah.
asked the question is so many students when they're starting, particularly the first year students, those first few days are anxious times, but
Yeah.
you survive, and so will they.
Well, that's right. It's intimidating, just the thought of it, I guess. But, you're there. It's to those of us that had always gone to university, it was sort of like another new day in university, right? Like we've done
Yeah.
this, but this is an added level. Like this is a professional degree. So it had that level of intimidation to it. I think that's something that we weren't used to, right?
So as I mentioned in the intro, you graduated in 1990, and can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about what UNB law was like back then?
Well, it was great. It was a good mix of, I felt because in the first year they divided you into two sections, and you had your basic five core courses that we all took, which um, I felt that was really good. I think we felt grounded. Um, there was a mix as well of, I was used to having profs in a university setting, but there was also people that came in from the outside to teach, which was a bit different for us. I had Alan Sinclair who taught property law, for example, and he was, excellent. And so that was a bit of a different experience in terms of having someone from the outside coming in. Um, there was, there's a great sense of collegiality because it was such a small school. I mean, I had come from St. FX, and then coming to law school again was smaller. St. FX was a small university. You had a sense of collegiality. I never really developed a great sense of collegiality with UMB. In retrospect, and probably during it, we would say we had a sense of ownership with the law school more so than with the university. And there'd be individuals that would be Frederictonians in law school, friends of ours from at UNB Law, that probably had more of an affinity than we did with the university, the old UNB. But certainly it was a great affinity with the law school. I think that probably exists in most law schools, having friends that have attended other law schools, but certainly, and some of it was intimidating. You had Chris Bird, Richard, Professor Bird,
Yeah.
who taught the Socratic method. So that was intimidating, but good, and it kept most people prepared. Not everyone, but no, it was a good learning environment, I felt.
Yeah, well, a lot of those uh, elements that you're describing are still in place today. So we still pride ourselves on limited enrollment and small class sizes, and then, that creates, yeah, as you say, a sense of collegiality and positive morale within
Yeah,
the student
definitely.
body. So it's one of our sort of distinctive features, and
Exactly.
we're trying to maintain that. Um, any fond memories from law school when you and your classmates sort of think back to those days? Any particular memories or stories stand out?
Overall, it was just, I think the 3 years, when we look back at them, I think, we did a lot of, you met some really good friends, and who later, became colleagues as well. I've relied on people professionally um, to help me, in my professional role. You know what these people's characters are like. You know how professional they are. You've got a history with them, and you're able to develop that and continue to work with that. It's kind of neat,
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And when we were doing the renovation to the student lounge, one of the things that we talked about is how important that space is for, not just a place to have lunch, but a place where those lifelong friendships and relationships are made, and it really
Definitely.
is kind of a really critical aspect of the law school experience, not just the courses that you take, but those relationships are very important because we are a collegial profession, right?
Yeah,
And
definitely.
it's very important. So let's talk about your first few years as a lawyer. You started in private practice in Fredericton. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like?
Well, a really mixed practice. So then it was um, at what would be then a larger firm in Fredericton. And so started out, and when, one thing private practice teaches you is when you go through law school, you think you're going to practice a certain area of law. Well, once you go to work and someone's paying you, and you're out billing, then it's not necessarily going to be what you think you're going to be practicing. Um, but certainly I was able to do things that I wanted to do in terms of, I always wanted to do some litigation. And in a large firm, as you know, when you're starting out, you're not going to be doing a lot of litigation. You're going to be, maybe doing research and that type of thing. Certainly, we used to describe articling as or practicing law is sort of, and weekends we describe them as 2 working days till Monday, right? Like with the billing, it's a business. You learn that it's a business, and you have to learn that business. Um, but I was able to do other than the regular practice things because I was bilingual. I was able to do some crown work, like get on and accept some um, to do some contract work as a crown prosecutor in terms of taking on some smaller files because I hadn't been out very long, but to do some stuff in court. So to get yourself into provincial court, to do some court work, legal aid, sign on to legal aid, to do some legal aid stuff as well, to get your feet in court because it's not easy even today to get your feet in court as a young practitioner. So, but initially practiced mainly, real estate, labor stuff, as I say, some criminal stuff, wills and estate stuff. I remember doing a passing of accounts in front of a judge. I think it was, my third year out. It was, with respect to a corporate client, representing a corporate client with respect to a passing of accounts. And there were a number of witnesses. And at the end of the day, and I was thinking, this is it's a difficult file. And the judge at the time, who was very, older judge, very well-respected judge, but he said, Miss MacLean, at the end of the days, at the end of the passing, he said, how many passings of accounts have you done? And I said, oh God, he thought I did a crap job on this. I said, my lord, we referred to them then as my lord, my lord. This is actually my first. Of course, this is what you know, sir. He said, for all my years on the bench, this is only my second or third passing, he said. So then I felt, wow, like,
Oh,
kind of
that's
cool. That's kind of cool. So yeah. So maybe it wasn't that bad after all. And they got a good decision. So no, and one thing I found about working at a larger firm as well is that I got to work on some different interesting files that you might not in a smaller firm because they would attract perhaps a larger institutional clients. I got to work on some interesting opinions and things like that. So it was very interesting. It was very interesting, busy 4 years for sure.
Yeah, and then you decided to move to the Law Society of New Brunswick. So why did you decide to do that?
Well, I was approached to do so, so I thought it sounded like an interesting thing, and because they were looking for a bar admission course director at the time. Again, based on education, and always interested in education. To me, education is the key to everything, and it's something that I thought I would, give a try. Just something different, and then I ended up being at the Law Society for most of the rest of my career with some little sidelines on the way. But yeah.
Well, let's talk more about that time. So, you eventually became the Registrar of Complaints,
Right.
And in that role, you're dealing with lawyers who fell short of their professional obligations, which couldn't have been easy. And I'm just wondering what motivated you in that role. Like, why did you feel that role was so important to you? Because it can't be easy. It's you're dealing with colleagues who are accused of, as I say, falling short of their obligations, and you've got members of the public who are upset, and
Mhm.
so and you're kind of in the middle of that,
Right.
and so that's got to be very challenging. You did it for a long time, so there must have
Mhm.
been something that was motivating you to do that. Why you felt it was so important?
Well, professional regulation is interesting. And I always, my favorite course in law school is administrative law,
Okay.
and um, and that's admin law, kind of in its purest form. Um, and not that I was you know, dispassionate about it in terms of not caring about the file itself, and you couldn't take those types of things personally, and I never. There were a few cases, obviously, that were more difficult than others, but um, I'd have to treat, each complaint sort of dispassionately. And it's about public protection, professional regulation. So protection of the public was important. It was interesting work, quite frankly. You never knew what was going to come, from one day to the next. Just the executive director, Mark Richard, would often say, we kind of seen it all. Nothing surprises me anymore. Well, there were still days I'd be surprised. Like I got complaints that I can't believe that someone, did that and actually pull that off. But
Right.
so I mean, to that extent, and then there is the thing about law societies are in professional regulation of the legal profession is that we have um, mechanisms in place or had mechanisms in place such as compensation fund that members pay into to assist people who have been suffered losses. Or often we hear about doctors when doctors are suspended or they go off into the sunset. um, Patients look for their file. Where's my patient file? What happened to my patient file? Well, when lawyers are suspended or go into the sunset, um, the law society, for example, when the sole practitioner is suspended, they appoint someone to take over those files and to contact those clients and make sure that the files are transferred. So there's an element of you are assisting the public in a very real way, um, and there's also situations where you're assisting members because you know, I would look at I had files that were difficult, but I often talk about situations when I talk about, mental health stream or whatever in terms of professional regulation. There's cases where you don't throw the rock to the member, you have to throw the rope. And those are important cases too. So there's elements where yes, there's been damage to the public potentially, but there arise out of circumstances that are, due to illness of the member or something of that nature. So you're able to assist. And that's when you rely on your colleagues and you know, your professional colleagues and other colleagues to be able to work together to come to a positive end. So it was, yes, it's difficult work. Um, and it's, I had colleagues in Manitoba who, we'd have national discipline administrators meetings annually. And we had colleagues one time that were doing a presentation to us with respect to a member that had, there was a defalcation. Um, and the member committed suicide. So, and when they were presenting that to us, they were crying. They would know that member. And these are difficult files. And it often deals with the end of a career. Not often, but sometimes it results in the end of a career. You're taking their professional license from them. But oftentimes there's hope at the end of that too, um, because I've seen situations where the day that the member, when a situation all came apart for the member, the lies fell apart. It was also the best day of that person's life, I think, because at that point, it was the truth was being revealed, and all of that was gone for them. So, and you can move forward. So it's difficult, but I think it takes a certain skill, but it's it's and members you have to have an awareness of admin law and what procedural fairness is, and members have to be treated with fairness, and you have to have a procedure that is in place that is fair. So it was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our viewers who may not be familiar with law societies and professional regulation, I mean, this role that you had as Registrar of Complaints, I mean, I think is critical to the administration of justice and the way that the public sees the legal profession, the faith that it has in lawyers, because if you don't handle those complaints well, right, it can have an impact in the trust that the public has. So it's such a critical role, and you did it for such a long time. And as you say, you've seen a lot. And so my next question to you is, um, are there any sort of patterns or common triggers that emerge when a lawyer gets in trouble? And is there anything that we could do better in terms of preventing those things from happening?
I think, across the country, my colleagues will say communication, client communication. That's the major area where, from little things to large things, little complaints, the small complaints arise generally from lack of communication with clients. Um, and there's other issues with respect to competence. In my later years, I was seeing more of an issue with in terms of competence, in terms of being competent to do the job, not in terms of capacity. Um, it I would see more and more often members that were doing things that they did not have the legal skills to do, um, and no sort of fear around that, no sort of you'd have members that would offer to help them, and they would be insulted by that. So you have to be, in my view, communication is key. If you have a file on your desk that you just don't want to touch, and we all have them, the one that you want to do last and sort of sits in the corner, you got to do that one first, because that's what can come back to bite you. And if it's bothering you for a reason, there's a reason it's bothering you. And again, to be competent, don't take on things that you can't do. Don't be a hero for a moment, telling someone you can do something, and you're not going to do it in the deadline that you've given them. You're a hero for a moment, but you're going to be a public enemy number one for a long time, because though clients have expectations. They're paying you. Colleagues have expectations, and colleagues won't report you probably, but your clients may well do so.
And probably most lawyers and law students sort of dread the prospect of getting a call from someone like you, right?
Yeah.
It's a scary situation for them, as you say. In the worst cases, it could result in the end of a career. Do you have any advice for lawyers that find themselves the subject of a complaint or an inquiry from the registrar? Like, what should they do if that happens?
You know, obviously you respond, but my experience has been that most good lawyers, they're so worried about it. Like, even if I call someone, if I would call someone and leave a message, I'd be cognizant of saying, it's about, I want you to do something on a certain committee, or it's not about, because they will call back immediately, or if they get a complaint letter, they're probably going to call and touch base and say, well, what's the possibilities with this? The ones that really get, and those lawyers that react that way, they don't generally get in trouble. And the reality is today that most lawyers are probably going to get a complaint. People are more litigious today. They do have a tendency to complain more than they used to. It doesn't mean that it's founded at all. Um, so you may get a complaint, but the members that really are in trouble or that the complaints are probably founded, they tend not to respond. They tend not to be worried about it, or they'll, fluff it off and cannot, and Law Society will give extensions, or they'll miss extensions and you just can't get a hold of them. So those again are red flags. So um, deal with them, deal with it up front, and generally, uh, these things just they go away to a large extent. It's a small percentage of complaints that end up in actual discipline.
It's very interesting because the same theme arises for students in law school. Um, and the example I'll give is grades, the midterm grades, like in first year of law school in December, right? And I don't know if it was this way when you were a student here, but we have a system where if you don't do well in your first term, those grades only count for 20% if you do better in the second term. So really, it's not the end of the world. But, and what I tell students generally is that most improve in second term. You're new to law school. The whole exam thing is a new challenging experience. So you're not going to do as well as you could. So I'll sometimes meet with students who are shocked because for the first time in their life, they didn't do well. And they said, well, am I going to pass law school? It's like, look, the fact that you are here and you came to see me and you're concerned about it tells me that you're going to do fine.
Yeah, exactly.
The students that I worry the most about are, if they didn't do well, it's whatever, I'll just, it'll take care of itself, or I don't actually have a problem.
Yeah.
But the ones that are actually taking responsibility, trying to get better, coming to see their professors, right? They all end up doing fine. And it sounds like it's the same principle, when
Exactly.
they're in their careers. If there's a
Exactly.
problem, deal with it, take responsibility.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of the day, across the country, in terms of professional regulation and discipline, I mean, lawyers that get in trouble, law societies pay a fortune to regulate a very tiny percentage of the membership.
Right.
That's the reality. Like there's a number of members that will frequently get in trouble, but over and above it all, members generally practice conscientiously and fine. But law societies do have to regulate those that are not governable, or it's a very small microcosm of the profession.
Well, the last question that I have for you about your time at the Law Society, and I alluded to it earlier, that you got to see a lot of members who were not at their best. Um, but I'm wondering, what in that experience makes you hopeful about the profession?
Yeah. Well, I get to
What's
work.
the
Yeah.
positive side of things?
Got to work with the best of the profession, though, because law societies are, at least ours for sure, is based on volunteers. We do have a staff. We had a staff at the Law Society, but it's the membership is made up of, or that our association is made up of lawyers who volunteer. We have a number of committees: our complaints committees, our discipline committees, our all types of different professional regulation committees. We deal with or, they're peopled by our members who are I got to work with extraordinary people on my complaints committee, discipline committee, practice review committee, in all different fields of law, or have people that I knew were try and reel them in to work on some of these committees. I got to work all of the time with some of the best in the profession until they went on and got appointed to the bench, and then you don't have them on your committees anymore. You get to work with them in another context, perhaps. But yeah, it was just you know, and the amount of volunteer time that these members would give, absolutely extraordinary. For example, a complaints committee, they would have 30 to 40 meetings a year, meetings
Wow.
slash hearings, and you have members that pre-COVID are traveling from all around the province to conduct interviews of members and complainants, and very, very very time-consuming committee. So, and you'd send them volumes and volumes of, reams and reams of information and files on, for them to read. And they would, to a person, read all of that stuff and be prepared. So
Wow.
it was just, it was, that's the joy in it. You get to meet, all kinds of people like yourself. You're on Law Society Council, met the deans through the years, got to work with deans, get to work with, because I was also assistant deputy executive director with all kinds of members of the profession and the judiciary.
Yeah, I mean, I see that in a very small way on the Law Society Council, and it's so neat to encounter lawyers, as you say, from all over the province who are so committed to the profession. As you know, they take very seriously that we are a self-governing profession, right? And we'll lose that privilege very quickly if members are not, properly engaged in that process. So yeah, it's really been a privilege for me to see that, and maybe we'll just give a plug to our viewers
That's
here
right.
and our students. This is a very rewarding way to, complement your practice with this kind of work.
Yeah, and it happens quickly before you know it. I mean, your law students are going to be, members of the executive of the Law Society, and it's who'd have thunk when I was at law school that eventually I'd be, making decisions about, or professional conduct decisions about members of the Law Society. But time goes by, and there's younger members too that are very involved. So it's important to keep that in mind. It's
Yeah,
their profession, literally.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, let's maybe transition to talk now about your current role, which is Commissioner of Official Languages. So you took on this role in 2019, and it's a critical position in our province. Um, can you just describe for us how you see your mandate and what your priorities are?
Well, I mean, my mandate is described in the Official Languages Act, and officially the mandate is um, to investigate of sort of the watchdog and the promoter. I call myself the watchdog is to investigate complaints and make recommendations to government about meeting their obligations under the Official Languages Act, and also to promote both official languages in the province. When I applied for the job, when I did the interview, my emphasis was on education. I personally see New Brunswick as it being a great asset that we're a bilingual province. And sometimes you hear in the political discourse negativity around that. And my feeling was when I applied for the job is that education really is the key to, talk a little bit about to New Brunswickers about the importance, the positive aspects of bilingualism. Let's not dwell on the negativism because we can do that as much as we want, but there are positive elements to it. So I feel my mandate. I sort of say the funner part of it is promotion. The less fun is the watchdog aspect. But they do go together very well, I think, and because you have to I firmly believe that it's important to have complaints. I'm not, sometimes I say we're going to do some promotion, we're going to look for complaints because it's only in examining complaints or encouraging people to understand that they do have specific rights in this province that we're going to encourage um, institutions and individuals to respect those rights. So it's all about respect, really.
And you mentioned the positive aspects of New Brunswick's bilingualism. What are some of those in your mind?
Well, I mean, I think we've got a different culture here than other provinces in terms of because we're a bilingual province. There's aspects that in terms of Acadian or Breton culture and music that we have here that they don't have, in some other provinces, potentially, or it's deep seated. We have more mutual respect, I think, for each other because of the fact that we're a bilingual province. People are aware of it. I think there's a feeling that we do have two languages, two cultures. It's something that is a benefit to us, and I think there's a pride. You hear sometimes there isn't. There's negativism, but I think there's a pride around that. I think it's an asset in terms of economic development. We do attract business here to New Brunswick because we are a bilingual province. We do have companies that set up offices here because we're bilingual. We do attract immigrants to New Brunswick because we're bilingual. There's actually a higher rate of retention of French, francophone or francophile immigrants in New Brunswick than non-francophone immigrants. So these are, in my view, great benefits, and it's overall it's a positive thing. To me it's if you have you're bilingual, or we have a bilingual province, we have a more of an open mind. It's more open for business, more open for acceptance of other people.
And the other sort of benefit that I see, as a parent of two young kids, is that they have an opportunity to learn the other official language. So, in my home we speak English, but they have an opportunity to be educated in French, and so that's going to open doors for them as well. In my family, I grew up in Quebec, and my father's side of the family is French speaking. So I, had French growing up. My wife didn't, and so just in our different experiences, we kind of see, my wife really put a lot of effort, like you, and to get her French skills up, and I just sort of took that for granted, and the doors that it opened for me. And what I like about raising two children in New Brunswick is that my girls are going to get to learn French right from a young age, and that's going to open lots of doors for them. So I see that as another
It is
advantage.
a positive. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
But it's something you have to continue working on as well, though. It's always a work in progress as an Anglophone or an
yeah,
Anglophone family. Myself, when my son was born, I made the conscious decision to speak to him only in French. So, and he went
okay,
to French garderie and or daycare, and he just kept going to school at École Saint Anne. So and I say, and not, I never told a lie about it. I never said um, but he spoke French. He just went into the francophone system, and now I say, well, you're an ayant droit. He's an individual who's now has a constitutional right to have his children educated in the French language.
yeah.
So these things we don't think about at the time, perhaps, but they're important. They can have great impact in our lives for sure.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Now I know you like talking about the positive side of things too. In a case called R and Godet, another UNB law graduate, Justice Living, wrote that, quote, "It is not enough for a linguistic guarantee to be offered on paper. It must be applied or put into practice in order to have meaning." And the Official Languages Act seems to provide fairly comprehensive language rights, but how are we doing in terms of actually putting them into practice? Are we living up to the promise of the Official Languages Act?
Um, there's always work to be done for sure. And I think we've come a long way. Now, it's important that your listeners understand the Official Languages Act sort of speaks to institutional bilingualism in terms of the Official Languages Act applies to government institutions, professional associations, not to private industry. I'm not going to consider a complaint from someone who says they didn't get service and language of their choice at official language of their choice at Tim Hortons. Um, with institutions, government institutions, there are there's ongoing problems, but one of the things that struck me when I started in the position is that there certainly is buy-in from government institutions, from government. There's a keen understanding of what's required of them under the Official Languages Act. There's a desire to comply. Um, but in some cases, it's difficult. We need, you know, the I see where the problems arise are often with the larger government machines. We talk about, so in New Brunswick, our government machines will be Service New Brunswick that give us, our licensing, our frontline sort of services to the public, and then the healthcare system. So, all of us at some point have some engagement with the healthcare system. There's more opportunities the larger the body is to not to be able to provide the service. So those are the situations that I see, are the institutions that I see sometimes we're having more difficulty. So putting it into practice, they're aware of it. They're always willing to work to improve, to try and put the recommendations in place. But sometimes it's difficult because the bilingual capacity isn't there, the staffing isn't there.
Mhm. Et juste pour continuer un peu en français, vous avez mentionné les soins de santé et j'ai remarqué que votre bureau reçoit de nombreuses plaintes au sujet des hôpitaux où on allègue que on n'offre pas de service, des services dans les deux langues officielles, généralement le français. Y a-t-il des défis particuliers dans les établissements de soins de santé en termes de conformité avec la loi sur les langues officielles et que peut-on faire à ce sujet?
Ça, c'est un problématique côté santé, puis vous avez complètement raison, ça vient surtout du côté anglophone de Horizon. Il y a aussi des plaintes des anglophones concernant vitalité. Mais encore là, souvent, puis on voit souvent les plaintes où est-ce qu'un patient ou un membre du public rentre à l'hôpital, se rend à l'hôpital, ils ont pas lorsqu'ils posent les questions sur le COVID, pas de service en français. Ils n'ont pas l'offre active. L'offre active au Nouveau-Brunswick, c'est qu'une fois qu'on se présente en institution du gouvernement, ils ont l'obligation de dire hello, bonjour. Vous donnez le choix de continuer dans la langue de votre choix. Souvent, ça ne se fait pas. Personne continue dans le système. Mettons, ils s'en vont au centre de radiographie. Et encore là, il n'y a pas de service. Donc, souvent, on a ces problématiques-là. Puis, on voit souvent les mêmes plaintes. Donc, comment est-ce qu'on peut arriver à une solution pour ces problématiques-là? On travaille avec l'institution. Donc, est-ce que vous avez les systèmes en place? Ils appellent ça les plans de contingence lorsqu'on arrive à l'hôpital. C'est quoi le plan de contingence? Pourquoi ça n'a pas fonctionné? Pourquoi vous n'étiez pas capable d'aller chercher quelqu'un pour fournir le service dans la langue choisie par la personne? Donc, on travaille avec chaque fois qu'on a une plainte, on travaille au fur et à mesure pour s'assurer qu'ils ont un système en place. Quand ça continue, quand la situation ne s'améliore pas, donc il y a plus de travail à faire. Moi, la problématique comment que j'ai, je peux faire que des recommandations. C'est sûr que les institutions travaillent avec moi, mais à la fin de la journée, il n'y a aucune obligation de mettre les choses en place pour qu'ils puissent rencontrer les exigences. Des fois aussi, Michael, il peut y avoir moi je dis ça comme une culture institutionnelle. Pour moi, à mon avis, il y a du travail à faire de ce côté-là. Comme moi, le COVID, lorsque j'ai pris le poste, c'était juste avant le COVID, j'ai pensé d'être capable de faire comme un peu plus de promotion personnelle, si on peut dire ça comme ça, mais je n'étais pas capable de faire ça. Moi, j'espère une fois que le COVID se calme, il y aura plus de capacité de faire les choses plus personnelles avec des employés ou, on va essayer de trouver des solutions. Mais pour l'instant, on travaille, on travaille avec l'institution. Puis comme le vouloir est là, faut juste le mettre sur le terrain. J'aurai toujours du travail à faire, ça c'est sûr.
Je me demandais sur cette question des soins de santé, je me demandais si c'était une question de ressources, parce que on sait bien qu'il y a des problèmes de ressources dans notre système de soins de santé en général. C'est pas juste avec les langues officielles, mais en général avec les
Oui.
médecins, avec les infirmières. Euh, Est-ce que cette manque de ressources cause des difficultés sur le sujet des langues officielles aussi? Est-ce que c'est à la base, est-ce que c'est ça ou est-ce que c'est quelque chose plus complexe où il y a d'autres facteurs qui viennent influencer?
Ça peut être ça, c'est sûr, parce que surtout pendant la période de COVID, maintenant, il manque une pénurie d'employés. Ou pendant le COVID, il y avait des employés qui étaient dirigés ailleurs, dans les autres ministères, des fois. Mais en santé, comme chaque ministère, ils ont l'obligation de s'assurer qu'il y a des gens sur les équipes de travail. Euh, ils autres font les calculs, comment faire ça, mais ils devraient avoir assez de monde bilingue dans l'équipe de travail pour donner le service comme service dans les deux langues officielles. Donc, est-ce que ça arrive des fois qu'il n'y a pas de personne? Oui, ça arrive. Personne bilingue. Oui, ça arrive. Euh, Puis avec la pénurie des employés du côté santé, ça affecte probablement de ce côté-là. De qu'est-ce que moi j'ai vu dernièrement, COVID, ça a beaucoup affecté ça parce qu'il y a une pénurie d'employés où ils travaillent ailleurs, dans une autre unité ou c'est vraiment la gestion de santé qui a l'obligation de s'assurer que même avec la pénurie, euh, que les services, les soins dans les deux langues officielles est là. La loi, la loi est là.
Et on peut dire aussi que surtout dans une situation d'urgence publique comme une pandémie, c'est encore plus important d'assurer nous sommes en mesure de communiquer avec
C'est
tous
ça.
les citoyens. Alors, non, c'est quelque chose
Mhm.
qu'on doit mettre l'accent dessus. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about sort of the practical aspect of New Brunswick's bilingualism, because you alluded to at the beginning of this segment that sometimes New Brunswickers get frustrated or negative about official bilingualism because they think that it's gone too far or whether they have that perception. You know, lawyers and law students, I think, understand the constitutional basis of this and your role. But what do you tell sort of New Brunswickers who have a feeling that official bilingualism has gone too far in our province?
I I mean, we get those types of complaints and, we and comments. And I think a lot of what's around that are myths. Um, and, today we call it fake news, I guess. I can't get a government job because I'm not bilingual. Actually, close to 60% of government positions are not bilingual positions. So, when you give people, if you can give people correct information, that's really all you can do. If there's a negative perception because of a certain sentiment, in my view, all we can do is not go down there in that negative rabbit hole, but just continue. My role will certainly be, well, as long as I'm here, is to promote the positive aspects of it, to take those myths that exist and and debunk them because there generally are myths. Economically, it's costing us more. Well, in terms of staffing, the staffing have to be there. It's just another competence. Uh, if you need a bilingual staff person or if you need a staff person that has a law degree, it's a competence. Either, it's a requirement. It's costing us money. Well, it's actually there's a report done for our office a couple of years ago highlighting the economic benefits of bilingualism to this province, and they're very, very significant in terms of the billions of dollars. So that's all you can do is balance it off with positive, correct information.
And you mentioned that you're interested after COVID to sort of get out there more and do some of this more positive promotion side of things. What sorts of initiatives do you have planned? Like how would you like to go about that part of your mandate once we're permitted to do so?
Yeah. I mean, we've done a survey late fall that we're going to be coming out with shortly. That's sort of a positive good news story. The federal commission actually just did one last. They published one last week. That's not going to be dissimilar to our own. That's just sort of that's just it just happened that way that they were doing one same time as ours. So, create a positive buzz around, what are the attitudes in New Brunswick about bilingualism? Well, they're actually really good, well beyond the majority of New Brunswickers support bilingualism. We're looking at doing a promotional campaign in schools, an animation that is going to talk about New Brunswick, about official languages for ages 9 to 14, two different kinds of promotional animation programs with some swag and that type of thing. That like to be able to get into the schools as much as we can. Obviously, right now is still not a good time, but something of in that nature that will maybe get the children's interest. To talk about each other, because I think it's a situation once we know each other a little bit more, then there's more of an understanding. And COVID kind of promoted that too, because if you're traveling around New Brunswick, in the last couple of years in the summertime, I remember going to St. Andrews and meeting people from the peninsula who had never been to St. Andrews. They were francophones, and we had been at Minister's Island, and there was an English guy there, and he understood. He realized they were francophones, and then he started speaking to them in French, and how pleased they were. So we get to see different things. Once we get to know each other, and understand each other a bit better, I think that's a positive approach. And we're also going to promote the rights aspect of it as well, because one of the things that the survey showed is that not all New Brunswickers are aware of what we do here. Um, and it's important for, I think, the minority language speakers, and for both official linguistic communities, to know that they have specific rights, and they're entitled to government services, or to professional associations, or cities or municipalities that have obligations in both official languages, to come to us so that we can have a look at that.
One thing that I really appreciate about what you just said is the idea of getting to know each other, like the linguistic communities. I think that is absolutely critical to sort of easing some of the tensions that we sometimes see around official bilingualism. Like, I grew up in Quebec, where we sometimes talk about two solitudes, right?
Right.
And I grew up in an English neighborhood in Montreal. Didn't know a lot of francophone kids growing up, and so you develop, and this was like during the referendum and all of this stuff. So all of these mythologies kind of are created, right? And then it was only a sort of after high school that I, started meeting more francophone people, and then started realizing, well, wait a minute, they're just like me, and I speak their language, and I speak mine. And interestingly enough, this is for Quebec. We have Anglophone Quebecers and Francophone Quebecers share a sense of humor. So a lot, even though they're different languages, right, we find the same kinds of things on TV funny,
That's
right?
right.
There are these commonalities. I remember when I was working at the Supreme Court, I met a guy from Montreal, a francophone Quebecer, and we would have like just not hung out, in high school. Like, we were on the wrong side of Saint Laurent, right?
Yeah, right.
and we started talking to each other. We're like, oh, you like that too? You watched that growing up, and we realized, well, actually, like, we have so much in common. Do you think there's I mean, I don't know New Brunswick as well as you do. I mean, would you say the same thing about New Brunswick, that we, these two solitudes are really, can be broken down? There
Oh,
are,
definitely. Yeah,
yeah.
and I think it's the same everywhere, no matter where you go. People want the basic things. Like they want their kids to get a good education, and they want to have, an okay life. And I think I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning thinking, I want to make sure that I'm maintaining my unilingual, culture, and I'm worried about this other culture. I think the more we get around and visit each other, or have potential for exchanges, I think I think it's going to it will open things up. And the recent report filed by the commissioners that the government appointed to review the Official Languages Act and then the education system, and that's something that they highlighted in their report as well, sort of building on one of my annual reports where I say we got to get to know each other. And they they feel that the government, not only is that positive, but the government actually needs to support that, find ways to financially support programs that we can, so that we can do that, because that in the long run, it's all about education. Education opens doors. As you know Graydon Nicholas always says it whenever we meet with Graydon Nicholas. It's
Right.
everything is about education. Education changes everything. So, and it's just another way of educating each other and getting to know each other, because I think we're all basically the same people. That's how I see it. But we do have minority language communities that have certain rights that have to be protected for certain as well. But I think we're all on the same page.
Well, I wish you much success with that work, because I think it's just really, really important and critical for our province. In our last segment, I want to talk about some advice that you might have for law students. Um, and one of the interesting things about your career, which we've talked about, is that you've spent most of it outside of private practice.
Mm.
And many students are looking for an alternative to private practice and the law firm environment. So what advice would you have for those students? And the reason I ask this is because so much of the structure around career services and recruiting in law school is focused around private practice. So it's the law firms that dominate the recruiting, and they promote and are good at the marketing and all this. So you hear about the law firms, right? And we don't hear as much about government or professional or organizations. So what advice would you have for the law student who's maybe looking for something other than private practice?
Yeah, I think the first piece of advice is, if you are interested in something else, recognize that. I think everybody who's in law school. I mean, this is a gross generalization to say, but I think a lot of people feel that if they don't go that route, you're somehow less. You haven't quite made it. I run, and I'm always like, and I might run 5 miles a day, and I've done it since I've been 18. And I'm not a marathon runner. When talk about running, it's always like, have you done a marathon? If I say someone I run, I've run longer distance too. No, I don't do marathons. But so I haven't quite made it. I always in my mind, like, I'm not a true runner because I'm not a marathon runner, but I'm healthy. But it's sort of the law school thing. It's if you're not, if you don't make it in private practice, but it's, and I'm saying, like, nothing wrong with trying it out. I mean, it's interesting, but just to recognize, if you do have that feeling, don't discount that. And when I was bar admission course director, working with articling students, oftentimes there'd be students that wouldn't get work. So I would often sit down with them, sort of be the career counselor at the other end, past the law school part, past the bar school part. Um, After they graduated, and sort of look at what did they like doing, what did after they'd article, like, and sort of talk about different things. And there are a lot of different things, and a law degree is a really, really good degree to have. And I've been offered different jobs through my career as well, and that I didn't take. But having a law degree gives you the capacity to think a certain way. It's a valuable degree, and you have to leave your mind open to other possibilities, because you may not think that you can do certain things, but it's seen as an asset, um, with potential employers for sure, because you do have the capability of working a certain way and thinking a certain way, and you have to keep your mind open to those possibilities. Don't think that you have to go that route. I think many do feel that they have to get on that route and stay on it, that route. And I even have friends that who are my age that I know they should have done something else. They would have been a lot happier had they done something else, but they felt this was what I had to do. This was to be a successful lawyer, was lawyering in a law firm. So, but I say keep an open mind, and you can have a lot more, not more fun, but you can do some pretty interesting things. And things tend to, like I say to my son, who's in his early 20s, you sort of stumble into things as you go through life to some
Right.
extent. Like, you'll do one thing and then a door opens, and eh, that's you can't plan it all.
This is actually a theme on this podcast because most of the guests that I've had, their career trajectory was like that.
Mm.
They started doing one thing, an opportunity. It sounds to me like, you were doing all right in private practice, but then someone approached you to join the Law Society and that interested you and you did it and you had a remarkable career there and that set the stage for what you're doing
Yeah.
now. And yeah, I mean, it maybe lawyers and law students have a tendency to want to plan everything out
Yeah.
kind of perfectly, right? But life isn't really like that, So
Life is not like that, as you know.
yeah, no, and most lawyers, yeah, their careers take all kinds, and I think too, like a strength, a real sort of ability is to be able to spot opportunities like that.
Yeah,
To sort of be flexible enough in
that's
your
right.
thinking and courageous enough to kind of make a switch
Yeah.
when the opportunity arises.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
certainly when I started practice, it used to be things are better today in that way. When I started practice, if someone even changed a firm, they were sort of like they're a jumper. Like, people started with a firm and you stayed that at that firm for the rest of your career. Otherwise, you were sort of, what's wrong with that person? It used to be, well, so and so went to, they changed firms. Well, why did they do that? Like, they're unreliable. So that's gone out the window. Like, people, change firms often, and people do different. So that's healthy. It's a healthy change is a healthy thing, right? But
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's some really good advice. And I'm wondering, in your kind of unique role, right? You were director of admissions, and then you were the registrar of complaints. So you got to really see like the whole sort of development of legal professionals, right, from beginning to end. What do you think the most important skills or competencies are for a law student or a young lawyer to develop?
I think to try and have a good grain of common sense um, in what you do and how you live your life and your profession. um, Communicate, respond to email and telephone calls and um, clients. Um, yeah, I be organized. Like, my personal motto was always organization is the key to success. You don't have to be brilliant, but if you can be organized, you can you can go the distance. Organization as a student, as a professional, is really important, I think. But again, the common sense aspect of it, I think, is extremely, extremely important because I really think people that have common sense over high GPA might have the edge over the people with the extensive intellectual capacity. And I've seen them as students, and I've seen students at bar course that weren't able to speak to me, and but very, very, very brilliant people, um, and then wanting to practice law. And I'm thinking, it could be difficult for them, but
Well, common sense is one of these things, that we know what it is sort of intuitively, right? Is it something that we can teach, or is it one of those, or you can develop, or do you kind of have it, or you don't have it? Like,
I think you make people aware of, to be human in what you do.
right.
There's humanity in everything. Even as a regulator, like, you're getting a complaint and you have a member in difficulty, and like, it's like the rock and the rope thing. Like, you have to look at each thing and think, well, you have to be you have to learn to think about things differently. Think about each file differently. Is there another workaround? do I treat this as, a paper file, and this is what the reg says, this is what this act says. But if there's, in some of that is a skill that some people have and some people don't, granted. But I think if we're able to remind students to be human, um, in our approach to things, at least to keep that in mind, I think it it can it can have more positive outcomes.
Well, one thing that I think helps in this regard, and we're going to try to be doing more of this at UNB Law, is experiential learning, right? So opportunities for students in law school to kind of be exposed to real people with real problems and try to help them out with proper supervision and all of that. So next September, we're opening our legal clinic, and we've hired a lawyer to do that and supervise our students. So the hope is that with some time, in law school, with some experiences in law school, students will be able to get better at this kind of thing, or recognize what it means to kind of be an effective communicator and a creative problem solver and an empathetic lawyer and all of that stuff. My last question is about how we deal with sort of stressful and demanding situations in our professional lives. So you've had several high-profile positions, public positions, right? So Registrar of Complaints, some of those complaints are public and lots of scrutiny on you and the Law Society, and now obviously as commissioner, right? I mean, that's very politically charged issue sometimes, bilingualism, and you have to deal with that, effectively and with grace, and keep your mental health in check. So, do you have any advice for law students and lawyers about that, about how to sort of maintain balance and sort of promote their well-being despite the challenges they might face?
Yeah, it's not always easy. Like I remember when I heard I was appointed to this position, the first person I told, other than my husband, the person said to me, "My condolences." Like, and I think, "Oh, okay." But and same thing as registrar. Like, I've gotten sued plenty of times in terms of, that role, in terms of being a regulator. So um, it's hard sometimes, for sure. But I do exercise. I run. That's kind of all and I've never been the type of person that takes it home. I mean, sometimes you do take it home, but you've got to learn to some extent not to, um, because then you'd never be able to get anything done. Yeah, I don't know how you teach someone that. I think you have to have mechanisms to be able to, to deal with it. And I think probably the running thing helps me. I mean, almost 10 years ago, I had cancer. That sort of puts another, you sort of balance things out now too. You think, well, hey, I got through that. I can sort of get through anything, type of thing, and you sort of laugh it off. But difficult things, and that doesn't change difficult things either. I hate flying. I thought, oh, when I've had cancer, I'm going to be okay to get on a plane. No, it doesn't change. It doesn't change anything like that. You have to have, we're all going to have road bumps in our life, right? And you have to be able to deal with them. And I'd see those members that got into trouble because they couldn't deal with the road bumps. And we're all going to have road bumps. Doesn't matter what they are, if it's cancer or sick children or, um, you know, job loss or, health issue, mental health issues. We've got to find something that's going to, and just the stress of clients, like, and billing. Like, if you're in a law firm, like, your work in progress is coming at you every month. And, it's, I see lawyers, very, very stressed out. But most of the people that are successful, they seem to have a really good balance in their lives, be it, um, they do something, they have other activities that they're involved, volunteering or whatever it may be. And I volunteer a lot too. And, I'm involved in a lot of different things, and that sort of changes your mind. Just change your mindset, and if you've got children, like, people that have children, do activities with their children. You don't have a choice, but, you don't have a choice but to go home and think of something else. So, but when you don't, and you're alone, or that's when it becomes more difficult, and you have to make an effort. You just have to not let those feelings overwhelm you.
I can relate to a lot of the things that you're saying because I found, for example, you mentioned exercise. I found that I can see a real difference in my state of mind, my productivity, my sort of emotional well-being when I'm exercising versus when I'm not. Now, unfortunately, I can't say I've been doing it consistently since 18. I'm in awe of that. That's amazing. But I noticed that in my adult life, anyways, where there have been periods where I'm not exercising versus when I am, it is like night and day. I mean, in terms of my well-being, it's so that is a point very well taken, and it's not. It sounds simple, like it sounds like, oh, okay, just exercise, but it is very profound. Like my own experience is that it's very profound, and I sometimes it's difficult to describe how important it is,
Yeah.
but sort of getting into a regular sort of fitness routine, yeah, I think is super important, and just doing things other than your job, right?
Exactly.
Um, I think is just critical, and the perspective thing too, right? Like to remind ourselves, as challenging as it is for legal professionals sometimes, we are very privileged
Definitely.
comparatively, and there are a lot of people who would love to be in our shoes, and who, because of circumstances or lack of resources or whatever, never had the opportunities that we had. So,
Exactly.
I think what you're saying is bang on, and yeah, I hope our students and our viewers really take it on. So, Shirley MacLean, we're at the end of our time.
Great. Yeah.
And but really, thank you so much for joining us on the UNB
Thank you
Law
for
Pod.
having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, it was
Never talked so
a
much
great.
about myself before, but anyway.
Well, it
Thanks.
was fascinating. It really was fascinating. We really appreciate it. We know you're very busy, and so thanks again for making time for us, and thanks to our audience for tuning in.
Thanks so much.
And we'll have more guests in the future, members of our fantastic UNB Law community.